name is Robert Vielhauer, and I'm Bob. Don't call me Robert. And I'm 97. I'll be 98 in March.
And what led you to Bonita Springs initially?
Uh, I was a carpenter by trade, and another gentleman that worked with me, we were working on a job up in Canton, and it was in November of that year, and we were putting what they call cedar shakes on the side, use it for siding on the houses. I don't think they do that much anymore, but back at that time they did quite a bit. And you had to use a little nail, it was about that long, and it was serrated, it was sharp, and you take a handful of nails and take your hammer and pound these shingles on the siding. And it was so cold that those nails would stick to your fingers. And every time you pull one off, a little tiny bit of skin would come with it. And I said to my partner, I said, I've never been to Florida, but I'm ready to go. And he said, me too. So we took off. And the reason we went to Bonita Springs, there's a little town a few miles from here by the name of Mineral City. And in Mineral City, there was a gentleman that had a grocery store. Geckler was his name. And my mother and he and his wife were close acquaintances. They belonged to the same stars. Mason, it was like Masons, but the woman's division of it, they call them stars. And they were acquainted, so they said, when you go down there, go visit Mr. Geckler. And I did, and the woman I wound up marrying happened to be his next door neighbor. We lived on Pullen, the corner of Pullen and Abernathy. I don't know whether you know where that is.
What year did you go down there?
What year did I move down there?
Yes.
1950.
Wow.
That was a while ago.
That's awesome, though.
We got married that same year, and she died in 1986. In the summertime, you could shoot a cannon down the main street and you wouldn't wake a sleeping dog. That's how dead it was. And consequently, that made it hard for me to make a living during the summertime. So a lot of times we would come up here and I'd work during the summer, and then in the fall the lady I married had 2 sons, and we would go back down there and live. And not every year. Now I don't know. I don't really remember what year it was, but Bill Piper owned some land at the south edge of town, and he sold it to this outfit that built a dog track down there. And of course, that was seasonal also. They would come and business would pick up and there'd be more activity around town. And when the dog track shut down, why, the town kind of shut down right along with it again, you know. Mm-hmm. At that time, Bonita Springs was really a little backwater town.
Wow.
Very small, yeah. Bill Piper and I married sisters. And of course, Bill was rich enough to retire when he moved to Florida. And I'll tell you a little bit about his background later on, but to get getting back to Bill, since they own what they call the Water Gardens. When I first went down there, the name of the place was, they called it Reptile Gardens. But the year I moved down there, they were just in the process. You know, they had roadside signs back in those times. That's how they advertised, and they was changing the name from Reptile Gardens to Water Gardens. And then, of course, when I married, and I became his brother-in-law. A lot of the work that I found myself doing was through him. He owned, he didn't own, I take it back. He leased 6 sections of land on which he raised cattle. Now, when I first went down there, they had a law they called open range. Do you know what that is? Okay, if you had, say, you lived in the Bonita Springs area and you decided to raise some cattle, you bought 20 head of cattle and you would just turn them loose. And that's what they call free range. In other words, they wherever there was some grass to eat, that's where they went. And of course, what they did was like they did out in the West in the early days, they put a, what do you call it, on them, with a brand. They put their brand on there. Yeah.
That's awesome.
The brand for the Piper's brand was 2. That was for the 2 Pipers, Bill and Lester, his brother. And then they called, if you took a 2 and put it on its side, they called that a lazy 2.
Okay.
I married my wife, Pauline, and Pauline's sister was married to Bill Piper. So that's how I met him. Yeah.
And then you said you did a lot of like jobs with the Pipers. Like
I did. I started telling you about Bill Piper had 6 sections of land that he leased, and where that land laid was what they call, what's that road they put out across south of town and went over to the East Coast? Well, Alligator Alley. Alligator Alley. Went right through Alligator Alley. Well, when they put that through there, then he had to start fencing it. And of course, they also put, you could call them, I call them loafing sheds, because what they really were was 3 sides, and a top, and the front would be open, and the cattle would go in there more or less to get out of the heat, you know. And they would also give them supplemental feed and so on down there. And I built a lot of those, and just rough stuff like that.
was that like your primary profession, or did you have like a
I did
primary job?
anything I could do to make a living.
Yeah. Yes.
Some of it was actually honest.
Didn't you say that you worked on Benson's? Benson's store?
Benson.
Didn't you say
Oh
you
yeah,
built
we put that. I don't know. Is that store still there?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we put that facade on there, or whatever you call it, Benson's store. Is it still under the same name?
Yes.
Uh-huh. I'll tell you one story. I wrote some of that stuff down because this stuff comes in my mind and then it disappears again. So I wrote a few things down just so I wouldn't forget. But one thing that was kind of amusing was Bill Piper's brother, Lester, and his wife, Lucille, they ran the Wonder Gardens. And Bill didn't take to that too much. All Bill did was he used to bring dead animals and stuff in there to feed to the alligators. And other than that, he stayed away from it quite a bit. But Lester called me and he said, "I got a little job for you. What I want you to do is build public restrooms back here in this. I I I don't know. I'll call it a junk room. And in this junk room, there was a big chest of drawers, had about 4 or 5 drawers. And I said to my helper, I said, Herbie, we got to move that chest of drawers out of here. So he said, where do you want me to put it? I said, I don't know, just take it out drawer by door and we'll dispose of it. And he pulled on the drawer and he said, Bob, I don't know what's in here, but whatever's in here is pretty heavy because it's so heavy. The drawer below it, it was the kind of cheap wood that you put in chest of drawers, and it bowed down. And I said, well, we got to get it out of here. We got to open that somehow. So we started on the bottom and finally worked. And when we got it open, it was about half full of silver dollars. There was hundreds of them in there. And what Lester and Lucille had done was every time somebody had come in, there were still silver dollars floating around. That was right after World War II. And they, instead of banking them, they'd throw them in that drawer. I don't know how many $100 was it.
That's awesome. I think I've seen like 10 silver dollars in my entire life.
Yeah,
So.
hundreds of them. And
Um,
they weren't worth a whole lot. I think they were worth $3 or something like that at that time.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So this is going to take you out of the Wonder Gardens a little bit, but what made you go to Ohio, of all places? What made you move to Ohio?
I was born here.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
born and raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, how long?
Well, I went down there in 1950, and in 1945, in March of 1945, the World War II was still going on, and I was drafted. So I went in the service. Then after I came back out of the service, I had a friend in Zor. I don't know if you know where Zor is, 3 miles from here. And he said, if you're looking for work, I can get you in the Carpenters Union and we'll work up in Canton, which is a reasonable distance to drive to work. So that's how I got into doing carpenter work.
Yeah.
But the town I was born in was a little. Do you know anything about Zor?
No.
That was a communal society, and when the people came over from Germany, instead of everybody working for themselves, they banded together, and they had a girls' dormitory and a boys' dormitory, and the reason for that was so the father and the mother could both go out in the fields and work and harvest their crops and so on. The last time I was down there, it had already changed so much that it was, I didn't feel like I was at home, actually. When I lived down there, like I said before, in the summertime, it was just, there was nothing going on. Heat coming off the pavement, that's about it.
Did you ever see stuff you worked on still, or has everything changed so much you don't even see?
I built I didn't build a lot of homes down there, but I probably built somewhere between 20 and 30. And a lot of them, I went to hunt them, see if I could see whether I couldn't even find them. Now there were some out on the beach road that was I found them, but some of the houses around beneath there were streets there that I had never been on when I went down there.
Yeah.
It was completely different, and it was just like kind of a little strange.
Yeah.
It just feels strange to me. That's all. People, the people that I knew and associated with, they were, even the people that were born and raised in that area kind of drifted away because they had to go somewhere. This one good friend of mine, I couldn't believe it. He and I used to hunt together and work together and so on. And when I finally found him, he was working in a grocery store in Fort Myers as a carry-out boy.
Oh wow.
And he was one of my heroes, Stanley Wooden was his name. I had a friend, also had a friend by the name of Dutch Bailey, and his property was out at Corkscrew, and I did a lot of work for him. He built a hunting lodge. We built it out of we would go and cut cypress and use it for roof rafters and floor joists. Cut it down there and so on. And I did one summer in particular that I didn't come back up here. I bought a house trailer up in Estero and took it out to Corkscrew, and we lived out there in Corkscrew during the summer. And that kind of reminds me of another story. When we were building this hunting lodge, we were up on the roof putting the shingles on the roof, and I said to my partner that I was working with, I said, "Do you hear those dogs barking?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, what do you suppose is going on? He says, "Bob, we're going to start watching." He said, "I've been hearing those dogs, and they go a ways and then they stop, and then they go a ways and they stop." He said, "I think they're running a panther." So he said, "We'll just keep our eyes open." And sure enough, the dogs came, not close to us, quite a ways away, but within sight. And ahead of them was a panther. That's the only panther I ever saw in the wild. Of course, down in the Wonder Gardens at that time, they still had panthers, but then they slowly died off, and they got so rare that they couldn't even replace them anymore. And I had this neighbor, the lot I built, I had a big lot, and he, like a half acre or something like that, and he had a half acre, and right beside us there was, I won't call it woods, but a lot of palmettos and some pines. And a rattlesnake, well, right when I come home, this rattlesnake come out like this. And he went and got his gun. He was going to shoot it. And I said, no, don't shoot it. He said, let's see if we can catch it. I will take it over and give it to Bill and Lester. Well, that didn't suit him too good, but he went along with it. And the outcome was the rattlesnake got away, and he was mad at me. He said, "Don't ever ask me to do that again." He said, "I had the right idea to begin with." They had a snake down there, an indigo. Did you ever see an indigo snake?
Yeah.
Well, I would call them a black snake. The only thing about them is they would I've seen them up to 8 feet long. And then they would be, about that big around at the biggest place, and they were back at that time. They were more or less common, but my understanding is those boas has even killed them off, from what I hear. I remember one time, and I can't think of the name of the town, but south of Naples on 41. What would be the first small town you come to? Do you?
Everglades City?
What would it be?
Everglades City?
No, it wasn't
Marco?
Everglades City. There's another one down there. They were famous. They had the
Rockford?
smallest post office in the United States. And this post office, there's another little town down by Everglades City, but that's not it.
I've read about that somewhere, but I can't tell you the name.
And this post office was
Really?
so small that it looked like one of these fruit stands that's sitting out along the road. You just opened this thing up and stuck a stick on each side, and then the postmaster would walk in and he'd hand you your mail. I was working in this small town. We were doing a remodeling job, and there was only one store building in this town, and then there was about 7 or 8 houses or something, village you'd call it, I guess. And in this business building, they had a plate glass window, and I would estimate it to be around 8 foot across the front of the building, and then beside it there was a door where you walked in, and they sold a few little groceries and candy and pop and so on, and I would go in there and get a can of pop. And when I would go in there, up against this plate glass window was this big black snake laying along the glass there, and I thought it was a fake. And then the next day that I went in, this snake that I thought was a fake, his head was on this side instead of that side. And I said to that lady, "Is that's not a real snake, is it?" And she said, yeah, that's our pet snake. She said he catches the rats and the mice around the house. She said he won't bother a soul. Don't let him worry you. Well, I watched him pretty close anyhow.
Oh, that's good.
Did you tell them on Dean Street when you bought your property how much you paid for your lot?
$26. And the reason for the price that they came up with was that's what the back taxes was on it, was $26. And I told you, I started to tell you about my brother-in-law leasing 6 sections. A section of land is 640 acres. He leased 6 sections of land, and the price that the Collier County charged him was 25 cents an acre. That's the lease money he paid. Now, when you got 6 sections, that's still a few dollars, but that's pretty dirt cheap. And I remember quite well, I met him one morning and we were on our way to work, and he was mumbling to himself. And I said, "You're not in a very good humor, Bill. What's the matter?" He said, "You know what they did? They doubled my lease. I'm paying 50 cents an acre now." He was so mad. 6 sections of land. Bill Piper was born and raised in Detroit. And during Prohibition, he got in the business of bringing whiskey across the Detroit River into Detroit from Canada. And he got rich doing it. And the federal government, they didn't like that too well. So they decided they was going to shut him down. And they planned to ambush him or whatever you want to call it on the Detroit River. Now this was, I think it was October or November. It wasn't winter, but it was cold weather, and they had him cornered. So he jumped out of the boat, let the boat go down the river, and there was a tree limb sticking out in the Detroit River, and he got under that tree limb, and I forget how many hours he stayed there under that tree limb till they finally got up and decided that he had probably drowned, and that was the end of him. And I said, "What did you do then?" He said, "I moved to Florida." That was the thing for him to do, but he was pretty well to do by then. Yeah, he had one thumb, and I can't remember for sure. I think it was his left thumb. Didn't have it. He only had 4 fingers. On the other hand, he had 4 fingers and a thumb. And after I got him pretty well acquainted with him one day, I said, "Bill, whatever happened to your thumb?" He said, "Well, my brother and I, when we come down here and we started the Wonder Gardens, we had to go out and get our own snakes and alligators and so on." And he said, "We were getting this one alligator and we were trying to load it in the cage to bring it back into town." And he said, alligator got a hold of my thumb. And he said, "When an alligator gets a hold of something, they roll." He said, I rolled right with it, but he rolled faster than I did." Chewed his thumb off. They were pretty tough people. I could tell you a lot of stories about him. Some of them were not too, they're a little too colorful. They made some movies down there when I was down there, and Gary Cooper was in this one, and they called it Distant Drums was the name of it. And these wooden boys that lived over in Corkscrew, their grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee from up in North Carolina or Georgia somewhere. And they all they looked like Indians, They didn't look like Seminoles. They looked like Northern Indians, pointing nose and so on. So they hired Bob, and they said, "Bob, you get up in this palm tree, and when the federal troops come and shoot, well, you shoot back. Of course, you shooting blanks, but you shoot back, and then they will shoot you, and you will fall out of the tree, and you will fall on this mattress that we got down here." So they said to the producer, "Start the cameras and everything." Here came the troops, bang, 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 and Bob was up there shooting, bang, 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 and they said, "Stop rolling." They said, "Bob, you're supposed to fall. Didn't you remember what you told?" He said, "I'm getting tired of those white guys always winning." He had a brother, Fletcher was his name, and Fletcher had a Model A car. Didn't have any windows in it, had a top but no windows, a couple doors. And he lived out in Corkscrew, and he didn't have a license on it, but he had a big sign in the back and it had AAA. Of course, he didn't take it to town, so it didn't make any difference. They were tough guys. This Stanley that I worked with, he used to, well, it all started, I told Stanley, we were working together, and I said, "Hunting season's getting ready to start. It'll be in about a week and a half." I said, how about you and me going hunting? You can take me out. He said, I probably never told you this, Bob, but he said, us guys down here in Florida, we don't hunt during hunting season. We hunt before and after. And they told this story about Stanley, and they said Stanley was out in the Everglades, and this game warden started tracking him, and Stanley saw him, and he went in one of these what they call islands, where they a little high spot, and I was thinking there, and the game warden said, "Okay, Stanley, I know you're in there. Come on out." And Stanley said, "You come on in." That was his answer. Yeah. Stanley was left-handed and I was right-handed. And we did a lot of work together. And one of the jobs we had was down in the Everglades National Park, and we built wooden walkways around there. And well, you know what the walkways look like, and for railings we used 2x6s, 14 feet long, nailed them up, and every time we'd grab one, he'd grab one end and I'd grab the other end, and then he'd try and go that way with it. And finally I said, "Stanley, what's our problem?" He said, "I'm left-handed and you're right-handed." Yeah. The place that I worked in one time, they called it the Dome.
Stand left and right.
Did you ever hear of the Dome restaurant?
No.
Well, in the north end of town on 41, there was a building built just like a dome, and they
Must be the
made a
60s
restaurant,
if you
made a
look at the
restaurant out of
cars.
that. But it was torn down before I ever left because they had so much trouble keeping the roof from leaking because it was round like. I used to have this guy by name of Herbie that worked for me, and a lot of work we did, was on houses that set up off the ground. And sometimes if you had to do some rewiring or something, the easiest way would be get underneath and then push, drill a hole and push the wire on. I'd always make Herbie go under there, and he just hated that. There was who knows what. Nothing ever happened to him, but he sure hated it. He said, "Why do I have to do that?" Because I said, "I'm the boss, Herbie." You understand?
Oh, that's funny.
Stupid.
Oh, man.
There was a young lady that she got acquainted with real well when we came up here in the summertime, and she was from Bolivar here, and my wife and her run around together. And when my wife died, this young person, a lot young, well, she was 15 years younger than me. She and I got together, and then she moved in and lived with me. And about 2 years after my wife died, she and I made a trip down to Benita Springs again. So I would say it was right around 1990, give or take, maybe 91, something like that. And it was just, everything was so different that it was like being in a town that I wasn't familiar with. I don't imagine do you know anything about the streets in Benita Springs? I'm sure he knows a little bit about them, and the names or anything. There's a street 1 block east of Old 41, and they call that Pullen Avenue. Well, I lived at the corner of Pullen Avenue and Abernathy, which is when you went down Old 41 way, my house would be about a block and a half down Abernathy on Pullen is where I lived. They had, like I said, they had open range when I first went down there. And one night, my wife and I had already gone to bed, and I heard this terrible noise. I just can't explain just what it sounded like to me at the time. But finally, I woke her up and I said, "Can you hear that noise?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you have any idea what it is?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "What is it?" She said, "There's probably a steer with horns out there rubbing on the side of the house." So I went out and looked, and that's what it was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They just come and go. Well, where the dog track was, there was a few acres of ground, and somebody had it fenced in. And I said to my brother-in-law, "Who owns that?" And he said, "I don't know why." I said, "Well, I got someplace to put my horse." Oh, he said, "Just take it down there and nobody will say anything." I never did find out who owned it. It was a different world.
Yeah.
The people that built the racetrack, they bought that property off of my brother-in-law, and they gave him 500,000, 500 or 550, I forget which, for that. And they was a little hard. They were making payments, and they was a little hard to get money out of them. And I said, "What are you going to do, Bill, if you have to foreclose on them?" Oh, he said, "I'll just build a fence around it and put some cattle in there." But they paid. That was a mafia that bought that.
Yeah.
That's who it was. From Miami. But no more dogs.
No.
I used to work there. That was one of my part-time jobs. Run a machine selling tickets. And there was 13 machines. And we would all get together. A ticket was $2, and we'd buy a ticket to show. And a lot of times we would win, and when we would win, we'd pay $2 for a ticket, and when we got our money, we'd get $2.80. See, when these dog owners would bet, they would not place their bet until just 30 seconds before the bell was going to ring and they were closed. Well, no matter where they went, we all stuck together. I think there was 13 of us, if I remember right. Well, the word come down, what do you bet? What he bet on? What he bet on? And he'd tell us, and then we'd bet on it to show. So that's how we did. Took a long time. When you win 80 cents, it takes a long time to get rich. Especially when you lose once in a while.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Pass the time away.
Yeah.